Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Boys Table. We're on episode 9. We're going to be talking about elitism. I'm joined as always by IskatuMesk. And we are a band of baboons, also known as elitists. You could call us that. I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about with regards to elitism is what exactly elitism looks like, or what it is. Like, make sure we're all operating on the same definition here. For me, an elitist is somebody who wants to get the most out of a particular field or craft or whatever they happen to be an elitist with regards to, right? Because nobody's, even though it's something that you can pursue, typically you're not going to have enough information to always be an elitist in everything that you look at or do. It could be a goal, but, you were talking some episodes ago, Mesk, about how previously, prior to looking at one of these TV shows about cars, you were completely... Like, you had very different perspectives on what made a good car and what your standards were for cars than when you came out of that. So that's like a good example of learning the standards and then realizing what is actually to be valued in a particular area when it comes to like objective performance, stuff like that. And the same stuff can be extrapolated to video games and to just all forms of media, basically. But for me, an elitist is just somebody who wants to go for the, like, they want to strike for the top. They want to, if they're producing content, they want to produce the best. If they're consuming content, they want to consume the best. They want to experience the best of what every field has to offer. And so if you're an elitist when it comes to video games, it's very often, at least in my case, not because you hold video games in contempt for some reasons, because you genuinely want to enjoy yourself and you are not settling for anything less than what will, tick your boxes, what will be objectively good, and, what will be subjectively good even to your, perhaps your specific tastes. But typically it's usually focused on objectivity. Is that in line with your experience?
So, usually whenever somebody has referred to somebody as an elitist, because I haven't really heard it for a very long time, except for when I did modding, it was always in reference to somebody who wants quality mods, but the tone was always as an insult.
Yeah, it's very...
And I always found that really strange.
Right.
Like, why would wanting something good, why would the brand to come with that be insulting? Like, I think it's a compliment to be regarded as an elitist. That means people recognize that you are a person who wants high quality content, but at the same time, doesn't everybody want high quality content? Like, speaking from paid products, I mean, you pay for everything in terms of time. Don't you want to make the most out of your time? If you buy a car or something like that, all in the same price range, aren't you wanting to go and get the most bang out of your buck? To settle for anything less is, at best, naivety. That's even how you pronounce that. At worst, it's self-deprecation.
It certainly doesn't seem like it's a good way to spend your time, experiencing stuff that you're not fully enjoying, or something that isn't it isn't the best content, right? It isn't the best quality. And in some ways you need to research what is low quality content so you can have some sort of cipher to decipher the puzzle and figure out what exactly you like and what you don't, and what is objectively good and what is objectively bad. You need to learn the standards in the same way that you would need to watch some of, like, the way that you had to experience this car stuff. You had to go out and look at something that was educational in purpose, or at least in effect. And from that, you were able to start judging cars based more on objective standards and be more of an elitist in that respect. But you're right that the public perception of elitism seems to get a really bad rap. And I myself have spent a long time trying to figure this one out. Why do people react very emotionally when you say, I don't like X? If they happen to be a fan of that, whatever you're saying, could be, Blizzard games are a huge source of this, especially since we're both, involved in those, or have been at one point or another, not only modding, but just playing them. The, people who don't conform to the popular opinion are usually ostracized in some way or another, but it seems kind of strange that with regards to assessing the quality of something, people would be emotionally attached to other people's hot takes on that regard. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me, and I think you're probably more familiar with gamer psychology than I am, so maybe you can tap into this one a bit better.
So usually what happens is people feel challenged because you break their bubble, their echo chamber. People don't like feeling like they've made a wrong decision in terms of purchasing something or investing their time. They would rather live in denial and build a wall around themselves and hide behind it than face reality. And of course, reality is that Blizzard does not make good products. They haven't since Diablo 2 Classic. Pretty much anybody, you don't have to put research into it, you just have to compare things. But people don't like doing that because it challenges their decisions. If someone invests 50, 60, 200, $400 in a product, to tell themselves that this was a bad decision, it brings into question everything about them. So they're going to see it as a personal attack for you to bring up things that are otherwise undeniable. You know, like this company produces low quality products, just even as a standalone without even comparing into anything. You don't even have to make an attack on these individuals. Just the mere observation threatens them and their echo chamber. It's something you see a lot with liberalism and other such things as well. And you'll see it in things unrelated to purchasing of content as well. For example, within modding. So the terminology of elitism isn't something I've really been subjected much to in game stuff for a while when, like I said, it was early into modding. And it was in regards to, I'm trying to think now because it was so very long ago. I think people making like stuff with like graphics and stuff in it, and people preferring campaigns that were more complete. And maybe also in regards to campaign creations who, at the time, you know, had a more of a reputation for being selective about what it was hosting. Now, not speaking about the quality of what exactly was hosted or what they chose to put up there, but just the mere act of being selective. And another analog to that is, of course, the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis. Is that the Super Nintendo had a restriction on how often you could publish on there, which gave it a reputation for being elitist. A lot of people didn't really like that. Even though as a result, the Super Nintendo had higher quality content in far and large produced for it than for the Genesis. And that's something that's like inarguable to the modern day. But some people just take an offense to that because they see it as a challenge to their decisions behind it. And in regards to custom content, I think that a lot of people become like self-reflecting apologists where they don't want to put effort into producing better content because they're not actually really committed to making custom content, but they don't want to be seen in a less of a light than people who do put in effort towards custom content. Even though the two are incomparable. For example, StarCraft 2 right now, it's embarrassing as a custom content developer because there's so few people even attempting to make real projects with the game. As StarCraft 2 has a lot of problems. But outside of that, StarCraft 2 is fairly inviting as a custom content system. Not as a distribution platform, but you can always release stuff, you know, with direct download. But as a system, it's more forgiving than the vast majority of comparable content. And people just don't want to put an effort into that. People don't want to put an effort into making the most out of StarCraft 2 that they can. And that's just an observation, an objective observation. But people will take offense to that when you bring it out because people just don't like actually putting effort into things. And the same goes with purchasing. And elitism isn't about making enemies of these people. To me, it isn't. It's easy to just say these people are morons. But if I can educate these people and introduce them to, you know, becoming an elitist, if I can explain to them the process behind the system of decision making and encourage them to make better purchases, to improve themselves, that's ultimately the end goal that I prefer. But I actually haven't encountered too many people who try to defend Blizzard, to be quite honest. Because I think that Blizzard is indefensible, and most people recognize this. Most people just would rather not have to try to defend them, because to them, it is tantamount to defending themselves and defending their purchasing decisions. And a lot of these people make these purchasing decisions and these investments knowing that they're purchasing a low quality product. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You know, I've played a lot of World of Warcraft, probably more than anybody who's listening to this. And I freely admit that. I freely admit I've made poor purchasing decisions and poor investments in the past. And I have no problem, you know, nagging on that whatsoever. But I think acknowledging that is too much for a lot of people because they can't confront themselves. They can't confront themselves to acknowledge that they've made bad decisions.
Well, it's an interesting sort of issue for people, I think, because you have the...
I gotta go AFK for a second.
Okay, sure. So it's an interesting issue, the idea that you have basically this huge amount of buyer's remorse with a lot of people, especially if they're playing something like a World of Warcraft, a massively multiplayer online RPG. And the idea is that there's so much of a time sink just intrinsic to the gameplay patterns and the fact that you're grinding and the fact that you're, you know, doing the same repetitive actions over and over again. Just the game is designed to make you waste time because it's a subscription-based model. So there is content there, but the amount of times you actually get to experience something new, novel, perhaps interesting, they're few and far in between, and the rest of it is just a sea of repetition. And, you know, typically games like this are, you know, obviously because they're designed to waste your time and because some people enjoy what could be, or can't speak to their motivations for continuing to play, but once they find themselves down at that rabbit hole, once they find themselves, you know, staring down the barrel of what is essentially, you know, plenty of money, plenty of time, especially maybe wasted in some respect, you know, admitting that they wasted that time is probably something that they are not a big fan of. It's probably not something that's too pleasant to do. But one thing that I think you have to do at some level is burn away that, you know, negative thing. You have to think like, well, this is a part of me that, yeah, part of me made this decision, right? The person who made this decision to waste all this time was me, and that part of me that informed that decision as good, that said, yeah, let's do it, that needs to be reevaluated. And, you know, you don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't throw everything out the window. But what you do is you say, well, why did I make that decision? And that sort of introspection, that discovery of self, trying to figure out why you made a poor decision, I mean, that's like a fundamental skill that you need in all walks of life, regardless of whether or not you're talking about playing World of Warcraft or just going through your existence, you know, going to school, going to work, whatever. You know, you make bad decisions all the time. We all do. We're humans. It's like a human trait that you make bad decisions in the first place. So the idea that you have a big problem with admitting when you made a mistake and looking back in yourself and thinking, you know, well, first of all, did I make a mistake? You have to observe that and say, okay, if I did, then we need to talk about this. And if I didn't, we need to talk about why other people think I made a mistake or why I'm concerned that maybe I made a mistake. Because ultimately, when somebody is saying, I don't like the game that you like, and you're offended by that, I think that does come down to some sort of internal, like, insecurity, where you feel maybe I made a mistake by liking this game and spending, you know, all this time and all this money on it. So you have to first observe whether or not you made a mistake. And once you've made your decision on that regard, you have to figure out how to not make similar mistakes in the future. And a lot of people will, you know, I know Mesk speaks in disdain about people who are not elitists or who are anti-elitists or liberals or whatever else. But the end result is that hopefully we create some sort of information that is somewhat educational in premise. The idea that you'd have people who would come in and they would, you know, not share our positions, not share our views, maybe be opposed to our positions and views. And through our lovely charisma, we were able to persuade them to at least give our thinking a try and see where it gets them. And you know what? If they experiment with that and they have no luck, and they just wind up in a worse place, then sure, they can blame us for that, even if maybe they didn't, you know, execute that idea to the fullest extent. But at the very least, we try. Like, I don't create this stuff to reaffirm my own positions. I try to learn stuff while having these conversations with Mesk and whoever else sometimes joins, and that to me is why this stuff is interesting. So hopefully it's educational in that respect. I find myself in this AFK time like restating my own position, anyways, and just talking about what the whole idea of the podcast actually is more than the actual content. But since you're back, I had a question for you. So I've referenced this for the past like 6 podcasts now because I actually found out that I started my playthrough of Flame Knives on the 6th of March. So today is actually the 2-month anniversary of me starting Flame Knives, and that's disgusting. And the reason why I wanted to bring up Flame Knives is that we were talking earlier. You mentioned that the people don't want to put effort into custom content sometimes, but they don't want to be seen as somebody who puts in effort. And you know, it's weird because you'll get people, and I've talked with these people who say like, you know, you shouldn't judge custom content so harshly. It's just like one guy doing it or whatever. But everybody judges Flame Knives. Everybody looks at Flame Knives and says, this is garbage. This is awful. How can you even play this? Like, everybody who's ever looked at this is always said, like, there have been a couple people who are like, I sort of like some of these gimmicks or whatever, but everybody, I have not found anybody who's defended it, you know? Maybe some people might say that I go too hard on it, but everybody agrees it is not a good project. It is not a good production. So I don't know how to reconcile the idea that everybody is fully able to judge Flame Knives, and plenty of people also judge, like, oh, they say like StarCraft 2 is awful, but Brood War custom content, oh, you can't judge that. That's not the same. And it's like
people are very selective.
And that selectivity, that inconsistency is sort of what gets me. And you know, there's a lot of that, I feel like, in all communities and in all walks of life. You'll get people who are not consistent with the way that they live out their lives and the, what's the term, the grading metrics that they use when they're judging other people or judging other projects or whatever. So I just hope people end up becoming a bit more consistent. They if you can voice why you dislike something like Flame Knives, you should be able to voice why you like something that is in the same space. And I mean, ultimately, I guess we would then be talking about some sort of debate about this sort of thing, which seems kind of silly to debate, but at the very least, I would like to see somebody who's willing to sort of play devil's advocate, even especially if they actually believed that, you know, StarCraft 2 is a good game.
Well, I can play devil's advocate for mods because...
Okay, let's hear it.
So, I don't know about Flame Knife specifically, but the thing about objective reviewing, if you're going to review things objectively, is you have to take into account a lot of different factors. Your review can't be just exclusively based on a presentation. You have to do some degree of research of why something is the way it is. Now, with mods, when you start trying to review mods, it gets a lot more difficult, not just because it's one person, but because the individuals tend to have very, very, very sheltered development. And I would say that like 99% of custom content, it isn't even worth my time even looking at. Not necessarily because it's bad, but because to me, it's like, it is not respective of what is capable within the game. It is not representative of what the game should and can do. And it's not representative of what attracted me to the game to begin with. So, for example, to me, if something uses RPG maps, it's right off the table, right off the bat. Like, to me, that's just like inexcusably bad immediately, including for Warcraft 3. That doesn't mean that it's a bad project, objectively speaking. That means I'm never going to actually play it. I'm never going to like it. And I separate that line between what is objective and what is subjective. Subjectively speaking, I think it's absolute garbage and I will never actually play it. Because to me, if you're making RPG maps in StarCraft, you are basically admitting you do not know how to make StarCraft projects at all. You're basically saying you don't know how to make a good project. Because if you want to make an RPG, you're not going to be doing it in StarCraft. You're not going to be doing it in Warcraft 3. You're going to be doing it in something like Neverwinter Nights. You're doing it in something like Unreal. You're going to be doing it in something like Skyrim. I think that you should learn the tools and the techniques necessary to actually make a real RPG and not try to shoehorn it into something where it most certainly doesn't belong. The only exception to that would be is if you can reverse engineer those games enough to make it work. Well, nobody has even attempted that yet. However, if you're looking at the actual projects, and you're trying to think of what actually makes it a good project versus what means my opinions on it, then the projects may well have had a lot of time and energy put into it. They may have been very, very well polished for their day and age. Now, let's take a look at flame knives for a second. So I haven't played this, so take everything I say about it with a grain of salt, but I do not think there's very many custom graphics in it.
No.
I do not think that Meat, SA-Meat, put in the effort to learn graphics. So, objectively speaking, this is an inferior project to projects far older than it, which is bad. You know, objectively speaking, a project should be an improvement from previous projects in some manner, even if it's two entirely separate end users. There should have been some kind of evidence of the communion of end users learning things and improving themselves to make projects.
Well, especially
Now,
when you realize that he was part of those communities that have like hosting the, he was on Campaign Creations and started .NET, so he was around. He was when he was developing, when he was shilling the project itself. Like, you've got some background there. When you do that research, you realize, okay, well, this person had access to all these resources. The custom graphics in Flame Knives are like, he does some minor tile set manipulation or whatever. I don't think he actually edits the tiles. I think he just goes through and changes the like adds sprites or something and puts them over tiles, but the end result is basically some sort of tile set customization, but it's very, very limited in scope. There's like maybe probably 5 or 6 custom assets that are used for tiles, and there's like a couple of assets that are used for ships, and I think most of those I don't think any of them were custom from his project. I'll put it that way.
Okay, so there's other differences when you consider this as well, though. For example, look at a game that is a business. When you're making a business, it is actually your job to improve. If you're releasing products that are not an objective improvement from a previous product, you have failed in the process of creating a product altogether. You have failed to actually deliver content. You have failed to deliver a product. This is where Blizzard fails. It is actually your obligation to do this because you're a business. You claim to be professional. You claim to be capable of making content, and then you don't do it. And you should, in an actual market, suffer financially as a result of being incompetent. But when you go into the realm of mods, there is no such obligation, and there really shouldn't be. What there should be is a personal obligation to improve upon yourself to create new and exciting features, but not everybody's going to feel that way. So this is where things are going to get money for custom content. So take, for example, my AI projects. I was developing Zapok and Armageddon Onslaught in the age where Brood War API was becoming the thing. Now, objectively speaking, I should have been able to take the code for Brood War API and implement it in a single-player environment and take advantages of the kind of features that it offered the game. Especially seeing as I had experience with StarCraft dating all the way back to 1998. There is really nothing saying that at this point, having worked with the game for over 10 years, that I should not be able to do that. But I couldn't because I didn't have the motivation to learn assembly. So when Armageddon Onslaught was completed, I basically had a choice to make. The choice was learn ASM and actually improve, or leave StarCraft because you have basically done everything else you can do in the game. So I chose the latter. And I think that was the right decision to make, because at that point, I no longer could improve upon what I had made. I could polish it in some ways, but I reached a curve in which the amount of time I was going to invest in improving what was at best technical demonstrations versus what I could gain in going to a platform more suitable for the content that I wanted to create, it was like incomparable, inarguable. And one could only hope that businesses like Blizzard would see things in a similar light as opposed to scamming the gullible. But business is, of course, very, very different than personal ventures. Personal ventures are usually as a result of an individual wanting to make something. The problem, and this is where I have an issue with a lot of custom content, is when people make projects in these arenas in an effort to either try to shake down money out of people, which is basically everything on Nexus mods and what StarCraft 2 has become. People begging for donations, people begging for Patreon, people just begging for money in a hobby platform while hand in hand producing objectively inferior content to what was produced for Brood War back in 2000. That's where I have a problem. I don't mind if some random average Joe comes in and he says, you know what? I'm not even going to bother getting into graphics. I'm not going to bother getting into audio. But if this average Joe slaps together something like Flame Knives in 2018 and suddenly starts slapping PayPal donation links all over the place in his map on Battle.net, then I've got a problem with it. Because this individual does not deserve any recognition, much less payment. But what really gets me is when people actually pay for these people. People actually start apologizing for these people. Oh, he put time into his project. Time does not equate to monetary return. That's never how commercialization works. On top of it, it's a hobby. If they were actually serious about making their content, you wouldn't be downloading a map off of Battle.net. You wouldn't be downloading something off of Campaign Creations. You would be purchasing it on something like Steam. But that isn't the case. These people try to find the line between having to put effort into something and then reaping some kind of reward off of it. Now, back in the day of Flame Knives and campaigns like it, that reward was not necessarily monetary. It was fame and recognition. People wanted to identify as an authority. They wanted to be recognized as an authority. And I'm not going to say that this is what the creator of Flame Knives wanted. I'm not going to say I know his intentions at all, because I don't. And I'm not going to speak to quality of his project because I haven't really looked at it. But I can say that Laconius used these projects as his inspiration to create his projects, while at the same time, hand in hand, refusing to break away from the shortcomings and limitations of those projects. And that to me is kind of an issue. I think it's all right to copy something to be inspired by it, so long as you seek to improve from the original project. But so few people attempt this. Now, this is where someone may think that I'm an elitist. And you know what? I am. Because I want to see higher quality projects. Maybe they're not projects I'm going to be participating in, but I helped a lot of these people make their projects. Flame Knives, I believe, is using, or at least Aeona Hawk, is using graphics that I created for Undying Fury. At one point, I did voice acting for Metathrom. I don't know if he ever used it or not. And I did a multitude of stuff for Laconius. This project wouldn't even exist if I hadn't done anything for it. But I've never played it. I never cared to play it because it's not my kind of project. When it comes to user content, there is a certain line in which you can draw a difference between the actual obligations of their creator from something that is a commercial project. In a commercial project, for example, what Blizzard develops and produces, you can go to town on it. You can destroy them top to bottom, and you have every right to do so. But when it comes to user content, I usually tend to look specifically towards their intent with it, because there's going to be such a varied amount of skill sets and the time investment into those skill sets and the availability of the resources behind the developers just on behalf of their exposure. Not every developer is going to have access to every single resource that is actually available for that game, in part because, especially for StarCraft, there is no compendium of resources or communication available for that game. The closest you're going to get is Campaign Creations and Star Alliance using forum searches, and that's not a particularly good educator for getting acquainted with that game, especially if you're making a large-scale project. A lot of it is going to be trial and error. There are sites like StarEdit.net, but they're inhabited by map apologists, people who are too scared to get into the world of modding because they know that they will be nobodies in modding. That's essentially why StarEdit has so few modders in it, is because these people are just too terrified to walk into something that people won't recognize their name in. That's literally the reason why. And this is the intent. This is what I'm talking about. This is the intent. I don't care if you're somebody who's been working on mods for 20 years. I don't care if you're somebody who has never touched a mod before, has no idea what's going on, is a bumbling idiot, doesn't have a single useful skill to his name whatsoever. I would sooner help the bumbling idiot make his way around if he shows he has actual genuine intent for improving. That's really all I care about. And that comes down to commercial content as well. I can look at games that are objectively bad, like Hunted, and I can say, well, the developer made a legitimate effort. I can extrapolate that from the way the project is presented, from the way the content is presented. There was, at points, legitimate effort placed into what ultimately amounted to bad products. And that, to me, is better than an okay project that only got there by accident.
Yeah, I would say that what you were discussing about with Hunted is probably pretty similar to what I feel about Exigo. You know, it's similar sort of story where they there's a lot of shortcomings, but you can tell that, I mean, they were slapped together. I mean, the EA logo is pretty telling in this respect, but in general, it seems like they really did want to do something special with the game, and the fact that they then went on to work on, what was it, Heroes of Might and Magic at some point. So like they were trying to maintain some sort of I don't know if improvement is the right word, but they were certainly in the same sort of realm. It's not like they went to go develop FPSs or something after that.
I think really the major problems with that company is they're foreign, and they kept getting shacked up with the worst of the worst for American publishers like Ubisoft and EA. If you have the Ubisoft or EA logo on your game, it's going to be bad. No matter how much effort you put in, those publishers are always going to drain you dry before you get anything done. It's just like Capcom.
Capcom. Well, what I will say about the custom content, and specifically to sort of close the book on Flame Knives for this discussion, is I think the thing that struck me so much about Flame Knives is that if you look in the README for it, you can sort of see what's going on with the intent. And I mean, again, I don't even know how old Metathrum was when he was making this stuff. You know, it's postulated by several viewers that he was no more than 12. But he was
older than that.
I highly doubt that based on the... I don't think a 12-year-old would be able to produce the kind of... the length of a project that Metathrum was able to. But, you know, when you... The first line of this README is that this is a campaign that relies on original gameplay, character development, and ambience to create the proper scene for the mysterious and ancient Protoss world of Karnica. So he wanted to tell a serious story. He wanted to develop characters and make them genuinely enjoyable for an audience. He wanted there to be some intrigue, some mystery, or something. You know, he says mysterious and ancient in his little first sentence here, so presumably he thought that was the way to go. And original gameplay, I mean, that really gets me, because he even samples Pokemon music and Pokemon gameplay. So I don't know what he's doing with that one, but I guess original in the context of StarCraft itself, yeah, probably. I don't think anybody's ever attempted to do something quite like Flame Knives in the avenues of StarCraft. But when it comes to his intent, it doesn't seem like this is like what's the term, like an elaborate satire of, you know, RPG maps. First of all, it was created in an environment, in an era where RPG maps hadn't even been popularized. And as a result of that, I mean, I don't know if there's any excuses you can make for it, right? If it was some sort of comedy project that was designed to, like, make fun of people who make this stuff, then I would at least be able to applaud the direction of the story, because it would have had me fooled hook, line, and sinker. But as we see, it is not a satire. It is indeed an honest effort by Metathrum at creating something that would have been, in any respect, respectful. But unfortunately, no such luck. Maybe he'll try again later on. And I have yet to play Eon of the Hawk, so I don't even know. Maybe there's something there for him. But, you know, custom content is indeed a very different beast when you're trying to judge a set of projects or whatever. You can't use... I do agree that you can't use the same metrics that you use to judge, like, actual developers with publishers. And, you know, these people have budgets. These people have a team, you know, teams of people actually working to develop stuff. They got those marketers. They have all sorts of stuff. You know, they have a lot more resources than the average modder does, especially if they're not willing to go and use the Wayback Machine to find all of the archives about how to, you know, use Brood War portraits or whatever the case may be. Especially since I think Samods has been dead for like a couple months now, so rip.
Is this dead?
I'm pretty sure. I haven't been able to connect to it.
Let me have a look.
It was .org, right? Or what?
samods.org. Drum roll.
Uh-oh.
Hey, I wonder if Magic's other website is up.
It is indeed dead. Site cannot be reached. Server IP
It was
cannot be found.
gameweavers.org, right? That one is also dead if that's it. That he just silently pulls the plug on it.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's actually really unfortunate if he did pull the plug off of it because you know, if anybody was actually looking to get into modding or anything, I would say, you know, use the search on Star Alliance because the communities are long dead, but there's a lot of information stashed away in there, and
Yeah,
I guess you could use like the Internet Wayback Machine or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really something else if that's actually permanently down. You said it's been down for several months.
Yeah, I was looking for their portraits page like sometime in January. Couldn't connect, so.
Well, that's I don't know if anyone I know would have backups that I don't know if they had FTP access. Like Ricky usually hoards stuff away, as does Labyrinth, but I don't know if they ever actually had access to that site. That's it's kind of unfortunate actually. I think that's actually kind of sad in a way. It's SA was definitely obviously the new layout and everything like that destroyed a lot of it, but well, I guess it goes the way of SME. I said I wouldn't be surprised if Stardate Network and other sites like it just disappear too, because if somebody is paying bandwidth for something nobody even uses, so eventually they're going to be like, why am I paying for this? Like, I'd be better off spending his money on alcohol, right?
Apparently Devlin, who runs or pays the bills for Stardate.net, is totally fine continuing to do that. At least the last we heard of him. So
I'm surprised about that. I don't think I've ever seen him do anything on that site forever, and all the time I've known of it. I don't think I've seen anyone doing that site do anything, except for like Disciple of Adun and like the occasional forum user as opposed to staff.
Wasn't Doa the guy who turned out to be a rapist? He's the guy who made Firegraft?
Is he a rapist?
Excalibur is telling me about how he was a rapist. So
maybe that's why he disappeared, for all I know.
I think he tried to come back when Remastered came around and people got
He probably
angry.
took one look at the disgusting mess that had become a Remastered and was like, nope, I'm going to go back to diddling kitties instead of fucking getting diddled by kitties.
Basically. So I do think that modding is, in general, like a harder thing harder nut to crack when you're trying to like take care of stuff objectively, trying to hit those, you know, strike for the top when you're creating stuff. Or, well, I don't think it's too difficult to create something that's really good that stands out, because
let's look at it this way. Okay. This is the way I look at mods, or just custom content in general for StarCraft 2. So in StarCraft 2, I was looking at custom assets, what little have been made, and a lot of them are kit batches. So now you have a project, I believe it's called Mass Recall or something like that, that puts like vanilla stuff into the game.
Yeah, it's the Brood War.
They're using,
it's the original 6 campaigns recreated.
And they're using some kit bashed classic assets from StarCraft 2. And almost all of them are really terrible. And like the things that are terrible about them are the really obvious things. So there's a battle cruiser where 2 panels on the top of the front of it have been twisted, and there's just a mass of stretch vertex, triangles there that totally destroy the UVs for it. And this is like a 20-30 second fix. Like it is so easy to fix. It is just like, it blows the mind that this got past anybody, especially somebody who had the assets obviously open in 3ds Max or something. So that to me is maliciousness. That's a clear lack of not just quality control, but actually paying attention to what you're doing. Because anybody who's looking at a model is going to see this stuff when it happens. Some things are going to get by you. Sometimes there's going to be some bug or some issue that crops up, and it's going to really just slap you upside the face. But sometimes stuff gets past you. But this stuff doesn't get past you. It doesn't get past anyone. It's bad. And then we look at Blizzard's alleged Warcraft 3 assets for StarCraft 2, in which they used a script to batch export them out of 3ds Max with StarCraft 2 settings, and it doesn't account for alpha masking. So there's a large amount of them, like the waves and the speed icon, that are not configured to use transparency at all. So there's just like white squares and shit all over the place. Like, that's maliciousness. The intent was not to provide content. It was to identify as having been provided content because he did something quick and easy that the average casual is not going to actually look at. They're going to see, oh wow, Blizzard's supporting their games by releasing these assets. Blizzard's such a good company, as opposed to actually looking at what they did and seeing that they made a colossal fucking mess that's useless to anybody who actually legitimately wanted to use it. Only because Blizzard wanted to identify as supporting their game rather than actually supporting it. All comes down to intent. All comes down to what was going through the developer's mind when they did this. In all likelihood, this script existed long before StarCraft 2 did. And they threw it in just to have it there, rather than actually do anything with it.
Yeah, I don't think that asset pack came out until after Heart of the Swarm too, which is pretty pretty funny.
It's a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster, like Battle.net 2.0 as a body. You can't look at Battle.net 2.0 and say this developer wanted to support custom content, because they didn't. Basically, every single thing about Battle.net 2.0 is a step back from all previous products that Blizzard Entertainment had. You still have to use local hosting if you want to make an actual project for StarCraft 2, and the few smaller projects are all held back by the issues with the service. Not to mention, it promotes censorship and map protection and all this other super negative stuff that damages exploration and new blood coming into the game.
Upvotes.
Upvotes and all that garbage. So, like, there's always intent, and sometimes it can be really hard to extract intent. And we talked quite a bit about things like monetized mods and all this other garbage on this podcast, and all of those really bring out intent. They bring out intent that maybe not was so obvious before. Like the people who beg for donations, people who put PayPal links on their maps in StarCraft 2, those people shouldn't even be allowed to put stuff on the service. They should be just banned and never heard from ever again. Because their intent is not to provide a quality project. If people provide a quality project, and people see that they provide a quality project, they are going to go out of their way to look to support them. That has happened for me. I don't even produce quality content. And people have come out of the woodworks and asked me, hey, do you have a place I can donate? Hey, is there anything I can do to help you out? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Simply because I had produced something in the niche that they had liked. And they went down and hunted me, as it should be. If a developer has to go out of their way to start begging for supports in their project, in that service, to me, they are no longer a custom content developer. They're just average Joe trying to make a quick buck off of the gullible. And then generally speaking, when you see people doing this, they're not producing quality content anyways. And StarCraft 2 has been a pretty good poster child for that kind of interaction.
Well, the issue with StarCraft 2 as a body in terms of custom content is that you really don't have a lot of where are the RTS campaigns? Where you don't have.
If you want to make
AI
an RTS campaign,
in the
to be honest,
game.
it's less work to go into Unreal 4 and learn how to make a game than it is to make it in StarCraft 2.
Well, that's the issue though, is because there is no support for it. So you don't see people making a campaign that is like even the horrible disfigured children that Blizzard spawned when they made the actual campaigns that they shipped with the game. You don't see people trying to emulate army selection in Legacy of the Void or whatever. Like, you don't even see people trying to do those systems and also have the build and destroy RTS gameplay. Even if it were like
one of the reasons why it helps to understand the metrics behind the custom content development. People are going to make stuff that they enjoy playing. But think about StarCraft 2. Are people playing StarCraft 2 because it's an RTS? StarCraft 2 hardly even classifies as a game, much less an RTS. You can't go through StarCraft 2 and think you're playing an RTS. Like, the people who enjoy playing Build and Destroy, they're not going to be playing StarCraft 2. So why would they be developing content for it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that is something that I'm glad you caught me on that one, because I was about to go down a hole of a bit of a hypocrisy. Because I actually have been privy to some conversations about my own content that I produce, and you haven't really seen any of my content. So to sum it up, it's very challenging. It's not very forgiving. I've disabled cheat codes. I've taken out stuff like previously I had this like convenience mod in there where there was like a sort pseudo smart rally where your workers would auto mine. Like I took that out from the updates. I've done all this stuff the idea is to play Brood War, like play the game that you're playing a mod for. And because it's challenging, more insofar as it's probably the most challenging RTS experience people have had, at least in the confines of Brood War itself, because the AI, you've seen all of the updates to the AI engine that have been coming along. So I'm taking full advantage of these and making the AI expand and try to starve you of resources and attack you with relentless numbers of units from all sorts of different angles and adapt to your own moves based on where you expand and all this other stuff that you would expect a human opponent to do if they were in their shoes, or at the very least a competent AI opponent to do in a realistic, like a reasonable RTS. And because I've been very, I'm not releasing a difficulty selection for it. Although the technology exists there, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be allowing players to, give themselves an easier time of it, because the whole idea is you should be suffering as much as the characters you're playing as are suffering. And that's inherently linked to the narrative itself. And the gameplay, if you don't find playing Brood War fun, you're not going to enjoy my products. But people have actually come to me and said, why are you making it so hard? Don't you see that this is a bad thing? And the way that the way that they are explaining it to me is not just comical because they are unwilling to rise to the occasion, but they realize that I make the highest quality content when it comes to voice acting and story and etc. that they've seen in Brood War, and they want to experience all that stuff, but they don't want to go through the ropes of having to actually play the campaigns themselves. And so that's why most of them probably end up watching the content when it's played by other YouTubers. But the end of the end result is these people feel somehow entitled to my work that I'm making because I want to play. Like, the whole reason I'm making this stuff is because I want to play, a custom campaign, or just a campaign that's actually challenging. I've been playing all these RTSs on stream. I've been playing fucking Age of Empires 3, where they just gimmick every mission. It might as well be Flame Knives, even though there's RTS components, unlike Flame Knives. So, I'm playing all of this stuff, custom campaigns, official games, whatever the case may be, and I'm not finding any genuine challenge. If there is genuine challenge, it's for a very small period of time, and it's inconsistent with everything else around it. So you'll just forget the skills you learned to win that mission in the next mission because of gimmicks. And so I want to make something that bucks all of these trends and actually provides you with a challenge where you will be rewarded for learning and mastering the challenges in the previous mission when you go up into the next mission, because you will have gone through some trials and tribulations that you'll essentially need to go through again, but because you've already done it, you're steeled and you're ready for the challenge. That's the intent anyways. But you get, apparently people feel entitled to the work that I create, despite the fact that they don't support anything to do with the work. It's not like I'm running this as a business where I'm, trying to produce a product that will be marketable. I'm not doing this for other people. I'm doing it precisely for me. And then I release it to whoever is interested, or whatever the case may be. I'll put it up on Started or whatever, Team Liquid. And when it's done, and it's out there, and people can give me their feedback, and I'll try to learn from that in a way that I agree with. But you're not going to see people who are, making content for themselves in this manner. They shouldn't. I don't think you should come to them and say, "Hey, you should change this because I feel entitled to your product." Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And I feel like this is probably also somehow linked to this whole anti-elitism movement, where if people's own personal
it's actually
standards,
the inverse,
right?
For developers of commercial games, they have a tremendous sense of entitlement where they think they can get away with making bad games, and then casuals empower this, so they keep putting less and less work into it. And anybody who wants a quality product is told just to not buy products anymore. And it's just a way of ensuring that there will never be a push to play good games, to buy good hardware, to, be able to spend your money more intelligently for competition and stuff like that. People view competition as bad. is very much the inverse of what you're talking about that happens in commercialization, actually.
I can't believe that people think like the competition is bad. Really gets me when people feel that way and their true colors come out about that, because it doesn't really make any sense to me. It's like you're in an industry where competition should be driving you to make a better product, and instead you're trying to like globally lower the bar so you don't have to put as much. Nobody has to put any effort in. Nobody like. I don't know. It really sucks that what it feels like for me as a consumer myself, as a gamer myself, is that when it comes to the point where I'm looking at all these games on Steam and I don't see anything that interests me, or I look up, maybe there is something interesting, then I look up the gameplay of it and it's definitely not ticking any boxes for me. What it feels like is that for somebody who's looking for a product that's actually high quality, that's actually striking for the top, and is attempting, the intent is to be a good product itself. If you're going to have to wait so long for that sort of thing to come out, you're going to have to wait probably just a very long time for something like that to come out. And then not only are these products just going to be so few and far in between, it's not like they carry forth a wave of inspiration for other developers to aim high to. They'll just wait for that trend to die out, or hop on that trend, as is the norm with these what are these battle royale games that are coming out now? You know, you just get all this stuff. Like it feels like this infinite Amon cycle of just it feels like it's never going to end. It feels like the stuff where you'll get actual good games, like the rate that you're getting them is so few and far in between. It's so slow that it's very unlikely that making a good game will be the new in thing among the industry. That'll be the new industry trend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there hasn't been a push to quality for a really long time. I would say since 3D came out, effectively, since it became more profitable to ride the trend for games becoming 3D than to actually make games, like with the N64 especially. Now, plenty of good 3D games did come out, but it was generally not the reason why they were 3D to make things an improvement. It was because it was new and fangled and people are going to buy that. That's why there was a pressure for old developers still making 2D products to go into 3D, and a lot of them are very disastrous, like Castlevania, for example. And some of them wisened up and went back to making quality games. A lot of them didn't, and the end result was what potential there was in games just kind of ceased to exist. And it's silly. And there was something else I was going to mention, but now I completely forget.
Do you remember what it was in regards to?
I don't. I think it was in regards to the campaigns. To me, it sounds like you're almost verbatim copy pasting what I was designing Apex for. In that Apex was going to have no difficulty sliders whatsoever. It was through and through build and destroy, no RPG anything, and it has no difficulty sliders whatsoever. It had only one difficulty, and that was rape. You go into it, and the tutorial was specifically designed to basically weed out bad players. There was a good chance you were going to download 50 gigabytes worth of missions only to never get past the tutorial. And I was very happy with that. I was very content with that. And if someone came to me and said, your campaign is too hard, but they said specifically it's too challenging and I'm a bad player, I would see that as a colossal victory. I would be so happy to hear someone say that. Because that's my intent, is to create something that's very difficult without being unfair. I don't like something that's, intentionally unfair. And as a result, the player was going to have quite a lot of power within those missions. The missions were going to be designed primarily for FFA and team play. So there's a lot of ways you could play around the missions, a lot of ways you could play around your allies and stuff like that. But the whole goal was ultimately to make a super challenging experience. I too was going to disable cheats. I was going to disable anything that I felt either made it too easy or opened up routes in which missions had an optimal solution above all other solutions. Such as, for example, massing heavy air is quite common within these larger scale games in terms of multiplayer. So I was going to, have the AI respond to that in, specific kinds of defenses, custom units, what have you. No, my goal wasn't to make it unviable. My goal was to make it not as optimal as everything else. So this campaign, had it been created, I knew would never succeed in the public space. Therefore, I never intended to release it in the public space. I had no intentions and no desire to gain any form of recognition for this campaign, although I had gained a lot of attention just by talking about it, because it turns out there was a lot of people who actually wanted that experience. People who had never played StarCraft 2 before. People were saying they would get StarCraft 2 just to play this project. Because the thought of playing an actual RTS that was actually challenging intrigued them. And I always found that really hilarious. Most of these people would never ever touch a Blizzard game after Diablo 2, for anything. And now we're telling me, hey, you finish this project, I'll get StarCraft 2 and I'll play it. Just because of the premise of having something that was actually super difficult. And actually difficult, not like, a goddamn disaster like StarCraft 2. Because StarCraft 2 and games like it are tedious, not difficult. And being able to see the difference between it and then, be able to actually actively design around it is something most people can't do who do attempt to make build and destroy, as I'm sure you have discovered while playing campaigns that are build and destroy. It's the desire to actually make an RTS inside an RTS game seems to be very what's a good word for it? Very rare, actually, which I think is really what drew more attention more than any of the other features I was discussing at the time.
It is a strange sort of situation that we find ourselves in when we're looking at all of the custom content down the years that's been created for all of these RTS games, and we've found very few attempts at making a challenging RTS, let alone, just any RTS campaign, let alone one that is actually challenging. What you were talking about with, trying to have the tutorial weed out bad players, like the first map being really challenging. Like, that's something that I think is, it's a good way to illustrate your intent to players.
Yeah.
And so it sort of comes back to the idea of, like, when you're judging custom content, what do you have to keep in mind what their intent is. And I think that would hopefully, especially if people were running a similar ethos in their head when they were judging the content they were playing, even if they were, beaten back by the tutorial and whatever embarrassment comes from that, they would still be like, at least at that point, they would be, this developer
I want
is
to
honest.
set them a platform where they're going to try to improve.
Right. Well, that's exactly the thing. And the issue that I have with the feedback that I would get regarding difficulty, aside from the people who were seemingly feeling entitled to the work, but without any of the challenge, is that people view the AI attacking with more than 14 supply as unfair. So, like, how do you make an experience that is perceived to be fair while also being challenging? And that is a puzzle that I have yet to solve, but hopefully, I think at that point it just comes down to the whole idea of, the reason why you probably weren't interested in releasing any of this publicly is just because, not very many people were well, I guess it sounds like you had more success in the public domain than I did, based on what you were talking about, where you were talking about, people who are interested in getting the game just to play your project. I have people who are telling me that they won't play any of my content if it's on 1.16.1 as opposed to remastered. So I don't know, man.
Who would play remastered, willingly? I don't get it. After what you've seen, remastered, you need 500 FPS to get the same responsiveness as Brood War at 24 FPS. That alone should kill that release, period.
Well,
who would want to play in
when
that?
you, if you ever try to use your hotkeys, your control groups, to 1A, 2A, 3A, it's impossible to do in remastered with any degree of consistency. You have to really pause it. You can't do it nearly as fast as you would like. And that's sort of an issue where this all ties back into the whole elitism thing, the whole having standards thing, where
to me, it's just a basic control thing.
Well, yeah.
If one version of the software gives you shit controls compared to the other, why would you even consider playing the other one? It doesn't look any better. It doesn't sound any better. It looks worse. I can't understand how anybody would willfully play remastered over 1.16.
So, I mean, it comes back to the concept that you had earlier, where you have software games that you should be improving upon these systems that they're using. as time goes on. And yet there's a marked downgrade in, you know, not only the visuals, not only the whatever narrative shit they added in with those comic books. Like, you can say what you want about those, but just playing the game, and you can't get the same responsivity from the overall production. You have to have an absurd frame rate that is bogged down by loading every single HD texture, even in standard definition. So you're good luck. There's actually 2 different sets of HD textures. And one of them is for when you're zoomed out in replays. And that is loaded when you can't ever see them in basic gameplay. So you have that, plus the HD assets. And if you the reason why I found this out is because the plugin developer, Nave, was working this out. And you know, fair fucks to him, I might be misquoting something he said. But, you know, he did say that the reason why shadows were bugging out when I modified iScript was because there was an HD file being loaded, and it was only bugging out on standard definition. So I'm in standard definition, and some issue with loading HD files is affecting my standard definition gameplay. Okay. So you have, you know, whatever they have going on behind the scenes, whatever they have going on with their engine is causing the performance to take a shit. And this is true regardless of whether or not you have the skin pack that they're adding. And I don't know. I guess you can argue that you don't need to pay any money for it anymore, but you're still paying your time. You're still spending time on this game. And that is, as everybody has said, the most valuable currency you have. So the idea that you would spend time developing content in Remastered even, I mean, that was a rabbit hole I fell down, and I'm desperately clawing my way back out now. So
I think paper Remastered to me sounds great, because I could easily make high-definition content for that game. I have the perfect pipeline for making all of the things you would need to make, you know, Blizzard, better than Blizzard quality graphics for Remastered. But everything that Remastered does to the game is a negative. There is nothing that, as a developer, that is remotely attractive to me whatsoever about that title.
Well, I can't figure out why it's attractive to players either. I guess it's the online stuff, the fact that you're able to, you don't have to host. I think
it's just the post-processing. You know, people willfully put FXAA into Skyrim like that. There's just something not right about those people. Like, why would you put in a filter that does nothing but blur the game and make it look shittier? Well, that's what people do. That's the primary thing that people do with software like I can't remember what it's fucking called now. It's the post-processing injector that Blizzard uses in World of Warcraft and everything else now, and I forget the name of it.
They have an
people
injector?
Use it just to put an FXAA, just to make everything look blurrier, just to desaturate everything in a really, really bad way, or to overly saturate everything. Like, going through Skyrim, I was just floored by, for one, how awful people willfully make their game look, and for two, how poorly documented the fucking system is. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's used in every frigging Skyrim screenshot ever now, and adapted to a lot of other different titles. But people use it to put in FXAA, so why wouldn't they also put it in StarCraft Brood War? Because that's what Blizzard did. They just used middleware for Brood War. They didn't actually do any research on it whatsoever. And as a result, it looks like absolute balls. None of the assets look like the original vanilla assets whatsoever, especially the Zerg. But also things like the Marine, the lighting and stuff is all completely fucked. I mean, you guys show screenshots of that every now and then, and I just can't get over how awful the user interface looks. The interface, the most basic thing you're looking at, is horrible. And people still play that willfully. I'm bamboozled.
They just aren't willing to eye patch the original.
I mean, to me, that's not like a subject of elitism. To me, that's just common fucking sense. If something looks like shit compared to its previous incarnation, there is actually no excuse. There can't be an excuse. It's unfathomable. And Remastered looks like garbage. It just looks completely like garbage. And the company willfully admits it looks worse by using post-processed vanilla screenshots to try to advertise and push remastered sales
Yeah, that got
by
me.
trying to make vanilla look worse than it.
Yeah, when they were showing like terrain comparisons and they had that blur filter on.
Yeah, that.
Well, I found out
this
actually.
This kind of shit should get your company just destroyed.
You know why that exists is they probably took that screenshot inside remastered, looking at the SD graphics, because they have this bilinear filter on that by default for the StarCraft or the standard definition graphics, where you can set it to sharp, which is the original. It's like as close to the original as you're gonna get, and then blurry, and it's supposed to like, because it's bilinear or something, it's supposed to like make the pixelage of the old graphics more rounded as opposed to hard.
I trust Blizzard and sharpening filters like I trust Blizzard and anything else. Not at all.
What a line. Yeah, I think there's
Sharpening filters are basically something you never want to be putting on a game. They're in no instance have they really been good. The only positive instance of a sharpening filter I have seen is in Unreal 4. There is a sharpening filter that is there in an effort to kind of undo the damage that temporal anti-aliasing does, because it's basically FXAA. And I asked the question, why would you use fucking temporal AA, which blurs everything, and then throw a sharpening filter on it afterwards? Like, you're basically trying to polish a turd. It's still a fucking turd!
Yeah, but it's a remastered turd, dude.
That's the only selling point for shit like that, is it's a remastered turd. It's new, so it's gotta be better.
Well, that's another. I mean, it sort of feeds back into that other thing that we were talking about. I'll reference it again. The whole you should be as you iterate, as you make new content, you should be producing better content. That should be one of the selling points of it being. Well, the reason why it's better is because you've had time to learn from your previous, fiascos and your previous efforts. Is you can now make better content. Congratulations. How about you do it? And obviously that didn't happen here. I mean, admittedly there were different teams involved, but the art director was the same. The art director for StarCraft 2 was the same as Brood War. So you riddled me that one. But even that notwithstanding, you still have the issue of, people looking at the content. I mean, what I will say is that if you go to the Battle.net forums and you look at the remastered forum.
Your first mistake is going to the Battle.net forums.
Yes, but your second mistake is staying to read all of the complaints.
Oh no!
All of them are hilarious, but some of them are pretty crazy. Like it came out that they added in this thing that mandatorily set the player colors to red and blue in 1v1. And what? I don't know why they did that, but by doing that, they then created fixed spawns in the ladder. Oh, and this was affecting professional matches.
Well, I'm impressed. I am impressed, yeah. Blizzard.
I also
the thing about Blizzard, and this is what really gets me about Blizzard and companies like Blizzard, it's okay. Sometimes someone's going to release a product that's not going to be that great, especially in comparison to their older content. I'm usually willing to let developers, off the hook in a review if I can see that they were like, oh, we made a mistake, we're going to improve on it. Now, I really hate the idea of patching stuff on day one. But depending on who you're shacked up with, you may not have much of a choice. But the thing about Blizzard is they always have to try to make excuses for how bad things are. And Blizzard tries to say things like Blizzard polish in a non-ironic manner as if it's actually something that exists to fillet themselves. And again, this is intent, always. This is what will really draw the line, is you can make something that is objectively poor quality, and you can learn from it, and you can improve. And that's a part of growing. You're never going to always make something really good. You're never going to always hit it on the mark. And even companies like Riot can understand that. Even though Riot, as a company has been producing, progressively lower and lower quality content for their entire existence. They've been just constantly going backwards, even as far as their splash screens have been getting worse since, like, when Ari came out. And they started throwing in all this post-processing and lens flares and other noisy shit, and they just stopped caring about proportions and stuff, and it just started looking like a goddamn mess wherever you went.
They outsourced
The technical
a lot
skill
of that
went up.
stuff to people on ArtStation, so...
Yeah, the technical skill went up, the actual quality went down. Kind of like Blizzard. And, you know, sometimes even Riot can say, hey, we fucked something up. It's not very often, but sometimes they'll say, you know, we missed the mark on this. We're going to try to make at least some kind of an improvement on it. And, you know, that's okay. So I'm willing to, like, at least think of Riot in a better light than, for example, Valve. But Blizzard always tries to make an excuse. They always try to make an excuse. And then they have the gall to say shit like Blizzard quality and all this other crap, trying to fillet themselves. When everybody who actually just looks at what they're doing will see as plain as day, it's not very good. And I have met many people who are Blizzard apologists in my time, obviously. Mostly during Warcraft 3, before it really became like the public opinion that Blizzard was producing low-quality content. People were really, really apologetic back then about Blizzard. And a lot of people now who are pro-Blizzard, who play World of Warcraft, like I was catching up with someone who I used to did raids with World of Warcraft back in Cataclysm and Lich King, and I was talking to her to a fair extent, and I would say that she's like a casual. But she still plays the game. She still does LFR. She still, I don't know if she plays with anybody else from the era, but she still is an active player. And she can see as plain as day all the shit that's fucked. Just like I can, just like you can. She sees as plain as day. And she still plays the game. And I don't think there's inherently a thing wrong with that because, you know, I can't, like I've said before, I can't tell you, oh, you know, you shouldn't be able to have fun with this just because it's bad. Well, I have fun with bad games all the time. You know, if I didn't derive some kind of amusement from World of Warcraft, I would not force myself to produce this like 30, 40 video thing about it. I get entertainment out of stuff being broken. And, you know, deep inside, I wish that Blizzard would actually try to improve this game and do stuff with it because I think there's the potential to actually make it decent. But more importantly, it's like, it's not so bad. Like, I don't think World of Warcraft is so bad that you can't find enjoyment out of it. Whereas, obviously, with Diablo 2 and StarCraft 2, or Diablo 3 and StarCraft 2, they are objectively far inferior to even World of Warcraft. They're just dreadfully terrible. And it's like unfathomable to me how anybody would find entertainment in that whatsoever. It takes definitely a special kind of person to find that. But I can't tell you, you know, well, you're not enjoying it. But even at that stage, it is impossible to, at any level, say that this was good, like developed well, like actually high quality content. You can't say that. It's just not possible.
Well, it's separating your subjective opinion of something in your amount of enjoyment or whatever that you derived from it, from the objective quality when you're looking at something as a reviewer versus looking at something as a consumer or the average player or whatever.
Thankfully, I haven't run into many people who are like that. If I do run into them, I don't argue with them because there's no point. There's no point in trying to change people's opinions about something over the internet. The most I can do is what I'm doing, providing examples. You know, I think that demonstration is really the best way to approach such things. I would never get into a conversation about the quality of something because I know it's like talking to a wall, and I am not good at conversations in general. I have no desire to convince anybody of anything. It doesn't matter to me what you think. It doesn't matter to me what you believe. If you choose to believe that something that is objectively low quality is not objectively low quality, well, there's probably nothing I can do to change your opinion. But what I have found in my experience is a lot of people have come out and told me, you know, your demonstrations have really opened my eyes. You know, I never really looked at things that way until you showed me how. And those to me are the best stories. Those are the best stories. I may not even hear from these people ever again, but quite a few have come and told me, you know, that I had some impact on the way they make purchases, on the way in which they review stuff. and the way in which they pursue entertainment, and they themselves are happier for it. And in modding as well. There was an individual who was making a campaign for StarCraft 1. He was getting into making custom assets for it. This was very recent, actually. And he was modeling and rendering a bunch of Protoss units. And he sent me them, and I told him all kinds of stuff. I told him the shadowing is off. You know, the shading is a little off. The colors are a little off. And he was new and inexperienced. He had never done this stuff before. He was just fucking around with Blender of all things. But I started giving him actual feedback, and he was like, hey, I had never even thought about this stuff before. Not to this level of detail. He was someone who actively pursued quality content, but he wasn't, his view wasn't like quite granulated enough to really quite think of things at that level. But I had been dealing with sprites since like 1998. Since I had first started with StarCraft, I'd started fucking around with stuff. And he started to look at that way, and then as a result, he learned and improved. And that is the kind of experience I want the most out of people. If people want to make custom content but don't want to actively improve, then I will berate them. But, you know, that's like as far as you can go. And that's as far as you should ever need to go. It's just, you know, choosing not to be involved with something on behalf of it simply not being a quality product. And that's where the intent thing comes from. Because if everybody pursues improvement, everybody is happy. But if people do not pursue improvement, if people do not look for improvement, if people do not ask for improvement, the only person that they're cheating themselves out is themselves. By not being elitist, by not being an individual who seeks high quality products, the only thing you're doing is robbing yourself of the opportunity of experiencing high quality content and being able to appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that is really what hits home here, is that the reason why I think elitists have a bad rap is definitely because people are insecure about their own purchases. People are insecure about the investments they've made, time, money, whatever. And they also don't want to be challenged. They also don't want, I mean, it's a really painful process to look at a part of you and say, well, this is something I have to dispense with. This is something that I can't look at anymore. I can't actually, you know, I can't be a self-actualized human being, an honest, not hypocritical person, if I'm going to, you know, allow this negative part of me to still make decisions. And they have to come to terms with that and figure out how to change that. And if they can't change that, if they can't, or if they don't want to, because everybody can, if they refuse to do that, then, I mean, there's nothing, you're right, there is nothing we can do. We can only provide examples of stuff that maybe they happen to like and explain why they should be more harsh about it. They should be more, you know, it comes back to the idea of we're gamers ourselves. We're consumers ourselves. We don't want to experience low quality products. That doesn't mean we don't like games as a medium. It doesn't mean we hold developers in contempt unless they've proven themselves to be contemptible. It just means that we want a high quality experience, and we're not going to be compromising in that, you know? And a lot of people will look at that and say, well, you're by not compromising, by only settling for what is, by only praising at least what is good, by not settling for second best or third best, whatever, you know, somehow that's a negative trait. But I feel like I've enjoyed my life way more and enjoy the content that I've consumed way more and been able to honestly produce better content at a way better efficiency, way better frequency. When I became an elitist, when I realized that what I was after was high quality stuff. And, you know, I think hopefully this conversation has maybe changed some people's minds about just the connotation of the word elitist, because everybody views it as this big bad boogie monster on the internet, or these keyboard warriors who are, you know, just going to berate you endlessly. That's not.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I don't publicate my content, because people will seek it out by word of mouth if they want to get involved. And I think that will be the case for this too.
Yeah, I think we can probably at least hope so. I have a feeling that it's something that you can't really escape from, right? You can't really if people want something and it exists out there, there will be some people who find it. And, you know, hopefully that's just the same about people who want high quality experiences out of their games, their movies, their whatever, their life in general. People will find those high quality experiences. So I hope this has been a high quality listening experience for you guys. And I think we can wrap stuff up. You have any final words?
Not really. I think that most people who casually listen will probably think I'm just some asshole who just basically likes absolutely nothing and exists just for the sole purpose of insulting stuff. Which I'm watching a wyvern walk through the air. Like, I find entertainment out of shit being fucked more than anything, but it's always the intent for things, and that's probably something a lot of people don't even bother looking for. But the thing that if people want to learn more about pursuing custom content or pursuing, you know, commercial content and looking at things, I would say intent is very clear, because there was one instance where somebody told me that a developer cannot be lazy, that it's like impossible for them to be lazy, and that kind of toxic mindset to live by is, it's going to cheat you out of everything in life. It's like saying, you know, my grandmother thinks that people can't do mean things on the internet. It's that kind of willful ignorance that is going to prevent you from pursuing quality enjoyment for yourself and being able to appreciate what actually is quality enjoyment.
Somebody told you that developers can't be lazy, and then they
ripped
in
their...
Oh, you gave it away.
That a developer cannot be lazy.
See, my joke was going to be...
That was my first and hopefully my last time encountering somebody with that sheer vastness of ignorance.
Well, travel down to America. We'll treat you right.
I think Canada's worse still. We have a liberal prime minister who literally went out of his way to correct somebody during a speech to say it's not mankind, it's people kind, as well as changing our national anthem to be gender inspecific. Like, the ignorance that rules this country, I think America will have a hard time keeping up.
Well, don't give us a challenge. We might rise to the occasion. But
I sure hope so. I need Trump's wall to rise to the occasion.
The only occasion I'm rising to is wishing Necron a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Necron.
Fight me on Crazy Mountain, idiot.